I don't think you guys know how much it means to me that you clicked on this and you want to listen to this podcast, which is now seeming to be some fun things to do in this day and age. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so it's fun being on my own. And the reason that I ended up doing some of these podcasts is because I was asked to be on a couple podcasts for hunting stories with deer vein and my Wisconsin buddies. And I just enjoyed it so much, even though we were doing it over the phone and it was like a COVID startup thing, right? But it just sort of addicting, and you get comfortable with other things, and just I learn from these people. So on this episode, my buddy Carson Green comes on here, and we yak about his expertise in climbing and canyoneering, him just being a wild man on living life on the edge, and even involved in the community and the chair of different committees to be able to focus on very much environmental things with how our waste systems come about and are implemented, as far as like getting ready, just as simple as getting rid of your leaves in your neighborhood. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, we go ham on the rock climbing, light on the politics, but have a fun time doing it. So enjoy this one. Welcome to the Clay Formula podcast. We got my new friend Carson over here. You don't have to share your last name. I'm not sure if I even know your last name yet.
You probably don't. It's Carson Green.
Carson Green.
Just like the color.
Nice. It's a pretty good last name. Who came up with that anyway?
I don't know how far back that goes. I mean, my grandpa is from the Upper Peninsula, where that name
really?
Our family came from, yeah.
Nice.
So I guess like he's the most of any one thing I am, which is
okay.
Like because of him, I'm an 8th Norwegian. Otherwise, I'm
only an 8th Norwegian.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm all mutt, far more diluted.
Okay, sure. So your grandpa, he came up there straight from the boat, or?
No, I don't. I know in our family it's known, but I couldn't tell you beyond. I know he's from Daggett, Michigan, right? Like
Daggett.
It's just south of Escanaba.
Dag-nabbit.
Yeah, right.
Daggett. That's hilarious. So I don't really know Carson that much, but we've gone climbing and we've done some slacklining and we've had
concert.
Oh yeah, Atmosphere concert. That was so much fun.
Where we met.
Yeah, where we met, exactly. Yeah, so we met at the Atmosphere concert, which I ended up going to like on a whim. My buddy that was my coworker was going to be there, and then he had a ticket, and then was like, hey, do you want to go? And I'm like, well, I don't really know, but I was like eating a steak at like 6:00, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll go, and ended up there like an hour later. We're like really close to Red Rocks, so it was awesome, able to just shoot up there and then run into you guys, and the story just keeps unfolding from there. That's what I like about meeting new friends. It's like the story just keeps kind of unfolding with each other, and
sure,
and like we've had a chance to have a good connection with, you know, being vulnerable with each other about things, and it's a beautiful thing. Like this new friendship it's great. So I'm not like dressing up wildly because we're on the most watched podcast ever, but I do really appreciate it.
Yeah,
so,
no, it's been good to meet you as well.
Yeah,
your skill sets and knowledge are interesting to me. So
okay,
and you're just, you know, so far it's been good to get to know you.
Sure. Yeah,
we had fun the other day hanging out in the park.
Right? Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, we just went and basically played.
Yeah,
which is nice we focus on ourselves and our things and our sports, and it's always like a grind, it seems like, a lot of the time, but it's nice to be able to just play.
Yeah, I think play is super important.
Oh,
Definitely
yeah.
one of my favorite things.
Yeah. Yeah. What else do you like to play with? Or do
Well, we
you-
played with those sticks. I've played with those a ton.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're really into, what are those even called?
I call them sticks. I mean,
Sticks.
most people call them devil sticks, but I don't know if it's true, but what I heard is that was a derogatory term for them
Devil
by the
sticks.
Catholics when they outlawed games and toys when the pagans still played with them.
Really?
But I don't know if
Okay.
that's true. So I don't call them devil sticks because it's
Sure.
supposedly derogatory.
Hmm.
And I would consider myself more pagan than Catholic.
Okay. So you're into the pagan rituals?
Yeah, totally, man.
Really?
No.
Okay. Interesting. So
Not at all. I'm not religious.
So these sticks, it seems like a thing that people do that you see at these like shows, right? With like flaming.
Yeah, it's
flaming
fun to do them with
sticks
fire.
and like people on stilts, maybe. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't
Playing with
seen
them
people
on
play it
stilts?
with those on stilts because it'd be a pain to get it up off the ground when you do drop it, which is inevitable at some point.
You need a caddy, a stick caddy.
Yeah, right. Or just really long handles.
Right. Interesting. But yeah, that's what I picture when I saw those sticks and you had the bag or whatever. It was like
Right.
some
And a
hippie,
bag of
hippie
toys.
some hippie show that's like people are hula hooping and doing like the stick game or whatever.
Yeah, just toys.
Do you bring them to shows?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm
Actually,
not
the first
wrong
time I
there.
played with them on fire was on the shore of Lake Mead when we were there for a Dead show. The last one in Vegas before
Really?
Jerry died. Yeah.
Wow. That's do you still use those ones? Or do you have it like on a wall?
Those ones burned that night.
Oh,
but
they burned.
I've made several. And I have
play with fire. That's awesome.
yeah, but I have a bunch of different torch ones. They're fun to
Okay.
play with.
Interesting. So you like to play. We had some fun playing with stuff. That was awesome. And I don't know, what else is going on with you? I mean, did you have a good weekend? Like,
Yeah,
it's
I went
Thursday, but
I
yeah,
went to
you had a good
Utah
weekend.
this last weekend with
Oh,
friends and did
yes.
3 days of canyoneering, 4 different canyons. We were in the Moab area, which isn't really my favorite place to canyoneer, but it
Okay.
kind of worked out with the group that was going, and we actually found some cool stuff. We did this one that was running water from a spring, so we were rapping through waterfalls, and that was pretty cool.
Through waterfalls, like, are you just you're able to stay slightly out of them, or are you getting...
They weren't
Wet.
very huge. Like that canyon, in different times of the year, you have to be really careful. But it's
Sure.
it's the end of. It's fall, so
Sure.
the spring was definitely like we started at above the canyon, like above the spring. So we were going down canyon and got to a spring that turned. It was basically a river.
Really?
Straight out of the ground, which was pretty cool.
So
And,
did you drove up to like a parking spot up high?
So it was in the LaSalle Mountains.
Okay.
And we drove to a trailhead and then hiked in, and then in this case the trailhead was pretty much at the level of the top of the canyon. Sometimes when you're canyoneering, you start near the bottom and have to hike all the way up around the rim to the top to drop in, and sometimes you start near the top, and then when you come out the bottom, you have to hike back around. So this one we had to hike back around after we came out the bottom.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't real tight, but it was really pretty. I mean, that's part of it.
Sure.
With canyoneering, it's like you're
Yeah.
in what, water has, eroded, and it's often just incredibly beautiful, like winding passages, and this was an added benefit on this, this particular one, and it's very unusual for that area to have a running water canyon. Most canyons are not running water canyons around there, and this one was because it was a spring, and
Interesting.
yeah, so it was very lush, even though we're in the middle of the desert, and So it was just a different environment. The rest of the weekend were all like more typical dry desert. I mean, there'll be potholes full of water that you have to get through, but
sure.
Yeah, that one with the running water was pretty neat. And there were like cylindrical areas that we went down. We were wrapping while the water was pouring over us. We're wearing wetsuits and stuff too while we do it.
So you're wearing a wetsuit.
Yeah,
and you have your harness on over top, and you've got rope going through. What kind of device do you use for rappelling?
I mean, there's all sorts of different ones. I mean, when I got into canyoneering, I was just using an ATC, like a typical climbing belay device. But now I primarily use something called a squirrel. It's not really spelled squirrel. It's spelled weird. Yeah, but it's a hard. I'd have to show it. You'd have to look at it. But it's designed so that you can add and remove friction really easily while you're on rappel.
That would be handy.
Yeah, so it's super useful for longer wraps or using thinner lines, which we're doing a lot of. Like my 100-footer line is only a 7 mil, which is super thin. Like you couldn't really use a regular ATC and be solid with that.
Yeah, you'd be zooming.
Yeah, so we use these various different devices. ATS is a good one. There's a whole bunch of different ones, totems and. Yeah, they're all variable for adding friction to be able to.
Do you wear gloves?
Yeah, I just wear those like really thin, like. She's so cute.
She's always in the podcast.
I was saying that I just wear like thin work gloves. Yeah. Some people wear thicker ones, but I've found that like the thick ones hold the cold water and make my hands colder. Sure. So I like the thin that shed. And I know some of the other things we talked about, like just to put them out there, because I think they're interesting, is we've learned that wearing, like you go into a thrift store and get a cheap wind jacket and wind pants and wear that over the wetsuit, and it gives you a vapor barrier.
90s?
Yeah, right. Whatever. I mean, some people find some pretty silly looking
thrift
ones.
Store, I'm thinking like, the silliest rappelling looking stuff. You can buy
oh yeah, we all look pretty ghetto. Mine right now is just dark ones, but they'll eventually wear out. They're now already being held together with safety pins. But that when you wear a wetsuit without anything outside of it, and once you're submerged and then you're out in the air and it's evaporating, it makes you really cold. And but when you wear just like a windsuit over it, it gives you this vapor barrier and it's significantly increased temperature. My buddy told me about it for a while, and I didn't see how it could make that much of a difference. And then I eventually tried it, and it was like night and day. It's so much warmer. So I do that, and then we wear pads. Like I wear like those fat volleyball pads on my knees, and then I have them all taped up so they last longer. And yeah, I mean, once you're in, climbing helmet, once you're all geared up, I always feel like invincible. Yeah. And I mean, canyoneering is super fun, especially like the tight stuff.
It looks like a ton of fun on your Instagram stories. Yeah, for sure.
I think of it as like nature's like roller coaster, because the best ones to me when you're going through like wet canyons that have potholes full of water, and we'll let someone down first who doesn't want to jump, and they'll test the depth and check the bottom for rocks and stuff, and then the rest of us will like climb up higher and cliff jump in. Those are my favorites.
Sounds wild, dude.
Yeah.
Canyoneering sounds wild.
And then but you were asking me about this particular trip, and this trip was not really a wet canyon area. There were definitely potholes that held water in some of the ones we did, but the first day we did one that was really unusual for the area and very unusual for what I've even done before, because it was spring driven. And I think some of what made it into the first clip was about that. But it was really neat. I mean, there was running waterfalls that we were wrapping through, and it was very lush. Whereas, we're out in the middle of the desert, and that's kind of unusual.
There's like pockets of, like, would you say bushes, lush?
Oh, yes. Yeah, totally. Trees and brush, and everything's wet.
Sure.
And I mean, it seemed actually it's similar to some of the canyoneering I've done in Arizona. Where you think of Arizona as really dry, but there's some areas in Arizona that are super wet, and
Right.
where I haven't really seen that much in Utah. Utah, usually it's pretty dry, and like we ideally go into what we call wet canyons after it's rained, but when it's not going to rain. You don't want to be in there when it's raining. But
yeah, that makes sense.
But ideally it rained fairly recently, because then you get potholes full of water, so you can have fun cliff jumps.
Swim and jump into them.
Yeah.
That's wild.
And then the other kind is not wet, or just dry canyons tend to be like more narrow and tight. And those, it's just a whole different thing. And like a lot of really fun techniques, like, you know, like one of the funnest is an elevator. And that's where you come along and like you're in a tight slot and it just drops down below you like 30 feet or something. And you just press your body out to the sides and controlled slip slide down.
30 feet?
Oh yeah. I've done bigger ones than that. So those are super fun. And then we also talked.
You're just like press, so you're kind
of it's like controlled slip, you know, just like holding your steering wheel.
Sure, yeah.
Or how you hold a
controlled.
Yeah, right. You get good at it. The first time you do that, it's crazy, but then you get into it, and elevators are fun.
Interesting.
And then the other thing we talked about was the fiddlestick technique that we did a ton of on this trip. So we probably did like somewhere around 30 rappels over the 3 days I just canyoneered. And
because my novice question is always, well, how do you get the rope down, man?
Right, totally. So like, say you're gonna do a 50-foot rappel, then 100-foot rope you could fold through the anchor, and then and when you rappel, you just rappel on a double strand rappel. So you put both ropes through your wrap device, belay device, and lower, and then you can pull the rope through. When you're on a 200-foot one, you're probably not going to have a 400-foot rope.
Right.
So there's different, you could take two 200-foot ropes and tie them together, and then have to pull, you know, one side, the knot side, obviously, and pull that down. But that rope on rock, even just a little bit of touching creates a ton of friction.
Right. Because you got to pull 200 feet up.
Well, and like where the anchor is probably back behind the lip to some degree, and that curve of the lip, or because, you know, a lot of canyons have been run lots of times and people pull ropes, it wears grooves in the lip, and those can add extra friction, and they can also be difficult because they can
hieroglyphics.
Yeah, right? We actually saw some cool petroglyphs on this trip. But it's the knot can get stuck, you know. We tend to use the name I know it as is the Euro death knot. It's basically just an overhand knot.
This one.
But that's what it's known as in climbing and canyoneering.
Euro death knot.
Euro death knot. I don't know what they call it in Europe.
Unreal.
But it's basically just an overhand. But that knot, even though that's one of the least likely to get caught in a crack when you're pulling it down, it's still, you know, a big thing that could get stuck in a constriction. And, you know, one of the trickiest things of, you know, big climbs, big canyon rappels is rope retrieval and being able to always get your rope. And people get ropes stuck all the time. So a huge amount of my effort goes into not getting the rope stuck, whether I'm coming off of a big rock climb.
Paying attention to
everything about
way more than just what you would normally think.
Yeah, that's honestly where my thoughts tend to be more on what I'm going to need to do to minimize the risk of the rope getting stuck than almost anything else. I mean, obviously I'm going to be careful about making sure that the anchor's solid, and that, you know, I'm wrapping, you know, correctly with all of the gear, but I'm also, a lot of effort goes into the rope management. And so there's this technique that you can do that in a lot of ways helps reduce that risk, but it's a balance because it adds other risk. And it's called the fiddlestick, and the fiddlestick is basically a solid, like a really dense plastic wedge that you put
It's a
into a
wedge.
special knot. The knot's called a stone knot.
Okay.
So you put the rope through
Put the wedge into the stone.
yeah, right.
This is archaic. Got it.
You put the rope through, whatever metal you have at the end, whether it's a wrap ring or a quick link or a bail beaner or whatever. And then you tie this special knot, the stone knot, and put the fiddlestick through it. And
so then it can't go like through the loop, right? Because it's got the stone or the wedge in there.
Well, man, it'd be nice to have
A carabiner, right?
a carabiner and like a piece of rope. I could explain it all. It's all right. I mean,
There's not a carabiner.
yeah, I wouldn't worry about it, but I'll you got carabiners.
I have too much climbing gear, dude. I don't even use it.
But what's cool with the fiddlestick is you don't put the full risk on everyone. You put it on the last guy, but you tie this. It's kind of a weird thing to demo with, but
Right. Daisy chain.
assuming this is a rope instead of a daisy chain, you put the rope through and you tie this special knot here.
We're still going.
You still recording?
Yeah, we're still going.
You tie this knot here with the fiddlestick, and the end of the fiddlestick has a pull line on it, which could be a very light, like we have a very super light line it's made out of a material called amsteel. It's like a woven, but I mean, it's micro, like it's super, super thin, but very strong.
Steel in the name sounds very strong.
Right. And, so then you have that attached to the end of the fiddlestick. And once you're down, you pull the pull line, it pulls the fiddlestick out of the knot undoes, and then the rope just falls through and down to where you're at, instead of having to pull it over the lip and add. So there's ethical benefits because you're not eroding the rock as much as someone who's pulling rope through.
Sure.
There's benefits of less likely that the rope will get stuck because there's technically no knot in it when it's falling. Yeah. And then you could argue, depending on how efficient you are with it, which is faster. I think I've gotten to the point using the fiddlestick enough now that I'm pretty much as fast with that as I would be with pulling ropes, and maybe even faster. Okay. And again, like, you don't put that risk on everyone, because the last guy is the one who takes the risk of wrapping just on the fiddlestick.
That's what I was curious about, because you got this pull rope that goes down.
We take we have enough slack
or something
that when you put the knot here with the fiddlestick in it, that we'll have enough slack in this to put another knot in it, and then attach that to the anchor as a backup. So everyone else goes down with a backup.
Sure.
And then the last guy cleans the backup, and then takes it's also tricky. You don't want to pull on the fiddlestick while you're the last guy wrapping down.
Right.
Now, once that knot is weighted, it's not likely you're going to pull the fiddlestick out, but you still don't want to mess with it.
Sure.
So I take the fiddlestick line and I get a bunch of slack, and then I put it off to the side under a rock.
Okay.
And
doorbell.
And then that way, once I'm and then my buddy who let it out before me is also monitoring it and trying to keep it out of my way if possible. It depends on the terrain, which every bit of terrain is different. So sometimes it's very difficult to keep it out of your way while you're wrapping. And
how long is your pull line normally?
Well, the one that we're using is in a bag that we let out as much as we need, but that one's like 320 feet.
Oh, wow.
Because I also have a 320 foot rope that we use on some like super long wraps. This last weekend, the longest we did was like 200. So, but that pull line, we don't have to let it all the way out when we're using it. We just let out what we need. And then, so I keep it out of the way. And then once I'm down, then you pull, and first it comes out from under the rock that was holding it out of the way. Sure. And then once you've got it there, then you pull it to pull the fiddlestick out of the knot, and then the knot just comes undone and the rope falls down.
And you yell, rope,
yeah, right.
Whatever.
Definitely whoever's around. I'm also cautious in case that rock comes down, but I haven't had the rock come down yet. Far I'm pretty careful.
Oh, that's a thought to think about.
Yeah.
Tie the tie the rock to a tree with some paracord, or I guess you don't want to leave anything up there, but
yeah, ideally not. I mean, obviously a lot of times you're leaving an anchor, but a lot of times not. I mean, we did the fiddlestick knot, the stone knot around a land bridge on Saturday, so that we left nothing. And so once we pulled the fiddlestick out, the rope just went around the land bridge and came down, and we didn't leave anything.
Interesting.
A lot of times you'll leave like some webbing around a tree with a quick link on it. But there are clean techniques. There's things called sand traps, which are basically a bunch of material that you fold over and cover in layers of sand, and your pull line dumps all the sand out and then brings your sand trap down, but you're wrapping off of a pile of sand.
What?
Yeah, there's a bunch of interesting.
Don't understand in my head quite yet.
Yeah, that one's even more complicated to explain. But there's a bunch of interesting like ghost anchor systems for canyoneering.
Yeah, I can imagine like you're probably gonna have, like you said before, some sort of ethics with things.
Yeah.
You know, you're in this canyon, probably a national forest or...
Usually desert when I'm going.
Just desert, yeah.
Yeah, in Utah, I don't know. Have you been there? Have you been to Utah?
I've been to Moab mountain biking one time.
Oh, okay. So this last weekend, we were in that area. We did canyons all around Moab. But that's not really the prime canyoneering areas. Like,
sure.
There's not a lot of deep, tight slots around there. And there's not a lot of... like what I would call wet canyons that hold a lot of water and potholes that you have to escape, which are the fun,
you like
hard
it to
parts.
Be like
I want it to be hard.
You want it to be hard. You want to do the elevator technique and slide in between, and then there's nothing underneath but besides a big pool, and then you just let go and you jump into this pool. And then you flow down the waterfall, and then most of the time you'd rather not use ropes, right?
Oh yeah, I mean well, it's funny because usually we try to down climb everything we can and avoid like Beta might say for this canyon there's 6 wraps.
What do you mean Beta?
Like I'm not doing first descents, so I'm not going down a canyon that's been unexplored. Someone else has been down it, and they've Beta is the same word applies to rock climbing. When you're doing rock climbing routes, you're following the beta that someone has documented for how difficult each pitch is, how many pitches.
I was so confused about that term with rock climbing until just now.
Oh, really?
But it makes sense. I'm like, what are these people talking about?
I couldn't tell you why the word is
alpha
beta.
Or beta or like, we're like, okay, dude, like...
It's data.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, right. It's the data about a route, and for whatever reason, it's called beta.
Right.
For
so it's like the
climbing and for canyoneering.
Secondary, whatever.
I don't know, man. It's just the data about it. It's the information.
We could play that game, like figure it out without looking it up on Google.
Yeah, I probably should have looked that one up. I think at some point I did,
but nailed it.
I don't really remember it. It's just the word.
Yeah.
Like, so beta is just the information you have about either the canyon you're descending or the climb that you're climbing. And so with canyons, what you want to know is what the longest rappel is. So that's one of the key pieces of information. So you have enough rope, and you bring typically 2 or 3 times the amount of rope you need for that, because what if your rope gets stuck on an upper rappel, right?
Okay.
So if your rope got stuck on one rappel and then you have another one that's long below that, you're going to be stuck in the canyon unless...
So you carry 3 ropes.
Sometimes as much as, or and like
the small
segments.
Ones in the bag.
Everyone's carrying gear. I mean, the serious canyoneering courses say that you should always carry 3 times. I often will carry twice. But not less than that. We'll always carry at least twice because, if we had to, we also have gear to be able to ascend. So if a rope did get stuck, then generally we'll be able to not really ascenders, but just enough rope to do prusiks and stuff. I mean, sometimes we'll carry like
lock up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll be prepared to be able to ascend whether we're carrying ascenders or not. If we know that we're going to need to ascend, then we might carry ascenders, but ascenders are heavy.
Yeah.
So I don't carry those in every canyon, but I have done canyons where just the way that you do that canyon is you go down it, and on your way down, you leave ropes and you go all the way down to a certain point where you could do a 300-foot rappel into an area that would take you a 10-mile hike to get out of.
Sure.
Or you just go to that point and turn around and go back up the canyon and ascend the ropes that you left.
I gotcha.
So in that case,
that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, it's cool. But in that case, I do bring ascenders because I know I'm
Sure.
going to be ascending. Otherwise, I just have, adequate cord on me to be able to ascend if I need to. So that's why double the amount of rope is. It also depends on the canyon. I mean, if there's like 20 wraps, that's that much more chance of a rope getting stuck.
Right.
Maybe a reason to carry 3 times as much. But
so say you're like this weekend, you're with a group of 3 total?
On Friday, it was 3 of us. On Saturday, it was 5 of us. On Sunday, the first canyon, it was 3 of us. And the second, it was 2 of us.
Okay. So you're carrying, you just split up. You only have 3 times the amount of rope for your group, right? Like not
for
each
the max
person.
rappel. It's not about the
person.
number of people.
Yeah.
It's about the terrain.
Yeah. So you just bring like one set of 3 times, or in your case, 2 times the amount of rope that you think you need.
Yeah, it depends on the
For
situation.
the group.
In this, over those 3 days,
Like you take
we never.
this rope,
I don't think we
I'll
ever
carry
took.
this rope.
Actually, on Saturday we did have 3 times the amount, but all the other canyons, I think we only had double.
So how long did it take you to get down the canyon this weekend?
I mean, they were all different. They're all
different. So you hopped to different canyons to descend.
Yeah. So the one we did on Friday was south of Moab but up in the LaSalle's. So that was probably an hour drive from the Moab area. And but it was a pretty short approach. I think we got to the beginning of it in like half an hour. Canyon itself probably took us 3 hours, and then another hour and a half or so to get back.
So you're putting like generally just like the good part of a day.
Well, but then
who
some
knows?
canyons can take, start hiking at 5 a.m. and you're definitely not going to get back till after dark. Like,
whoa.
Yeah. I mean, it just depends.
Do you bring camping gear and go camp and do a 2-day?
The one that I was thinking of when I said that, it's actually a 5-mile backpack to get in to like a base camp. And then it's that. So then from that point, it's 5 a.m. till dark that night to get back to your base camp, and then have to backpack out 5 miles the next day.
Sounds like a hell of an adventure.
Yeah, that's like out in the ones I've done like that are out in Escalante, which is
Where's that?
It's Utah. It's like central Utah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Utah very much, but
that's a lot on canyoneering, and I'm sure most people couldn't follow a lot of that.
I mean, it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about like your main interests with going on a canyoneering trip. Just from watching your story, I feel like you enjoy those arches and just like noticing what water has done to the landscape. And
it's so beautiful.
You're like, I'm out here. I got the ability to enjoy all this beauty.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah. And then like the tight canyons, it's a lot about like, keeping your head when you're compressed. I mean, I've been through like the tightest one I've been through. There was a 40-foot section where I was like, I couldn't turn my head. My head had to be sideways. I couldn't fit my head straight.
Sure.
And I had to exhale, and then I could move. And then when I took a breath, I was stuck and moved through like 40 feet of chamber like that. And then sometimes you have to like lay down and worm through the depressions in the rock to find the narrow or the spot that's wide enough that your body will fit through.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That sounds wild.
Yeah. So the tight ones, it's a whole different thing, but those are super fun too. And like, when you get into these places where, very few people go.
So super fun. The risky stuff is super fun, as in like, you kind of feel like you're in your like bliss, your you're on the edge of life a little bit. I mean, you're a climber, like lots of climbers are just like want to be on the edge. Like I know for me, extreme sports, like my dirt bike, I get in one zone.
Yeah, like flow
state. And that, yeah, I love hanging out with people in flow state. I love being on my own focus in flow state, and it's like the same deal, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely, since I was pretty young, realized that I enjoy having my life in my hands. Mm-hmm. And there's something about that that's an important part of life for me, whether it's rock climbing or canyoneering honestly feels less dangerous, even though I know that there's a lot of danger to it, but it seems more,
if you know what you're doing, you can be safe and have a good time.
It's pretty manageable. I mean, the weekend before I was climbing in Eldo and on a trad climb that's pretty much near my limit, and I was not having a good day, and I took a huge fall, and that's, I fell probably almost 25 feet on a trad lead fall. And
damn.
That's where it's probably where I push it the hardest. Although like when I mountain bike, I feel like that's the most dangerous thing. Which I don't do that as much because climbing, I don't know. It's all calculated, but you brought up super fun. Yeah. But I'm describing things that probably sound like terror to a lot of people.
That's what I'm getting at.
It's that type 2 fun concept,
exactly.
It's not like I have the most fun when I'm involved in something that there is suffering involved.
Sure.
And I'm pushing myself through getting outside my comfort zone, pushing myself through things that that aren't easy. Like, I guess I don't feel a lot of satisfaction from things that are as much that aren't difficult, that don't scare me. It's weird because I don't want to get hurt. Like I consider myself pretty conservative and careful. I don't want to get hurt. I have been injured. When I was 25, I wrapped my leg around a stump snowboarding and tore everything in my knee except for one ligament. And that took me, 2 surgeries to rebuild my knee and 9.5 months of physical therapy. And, I don't want to go through anything like that again. I recognize that there's risk involved in the things I enjoy, but, I put a lot of effort into being strong enough to do what I do, and practicing.
So your lifestyle of training and practicing and
being aware of my limits,
yeah,
which change over time, and honestly, like that fall I took a couple weekends ago, that was, it was a cold morning and my hands were cold, and I think if we had started an hour later when the sun was on us, I would have pulled it. I was like literally like inches from pulling this crux move where we were on the first pitch of a 6-pitch climb. So a pitch is typically a rope length.
Sure. 100 feet?
It depends.
Sure.
I mean, it's also terrain dependent because sometimes you end a pitch before you're out of rope, but you're at a good spot to set up an anchor and bring your partner up.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you go as far as you can until you run out of rope, and then you end up simul climbing where the second is starting to climb before you even built an anchor. Not frequently, but
sure.
And so this particular climb was a climb that scared me. My personal goal right now is to get to where I feel like I'm a solid 5'9" climber anywhere, which the test place for that is Eldo, because 5'9" in Eldo is hard. Like, if you can consistently climb 5'9" in Eldo or lead 5'9" in Eldo, then you can pretty much lead 5'9" anywhere, which opens up, a world of opportunity. And, I'm close. Like, I'm right on the edge of that. And this climb was a 5'9" plus, which based on those grades, like it's probably 10 something. And the crux is the first pitch, and supposedly the crux was the lower part of the first pitch, which I did get, but then this other part is where I fell. And, it was, like I said, it was kind of an off day. It was cold. My hands were cold, and I was getting pumped easily. So I was probably kind of in my head.
In that cold space, it takes a while to work through that pump until you get back to like usable.
Yeah. But I was on lead, and I'd already passed what was supposedly the crux. So it wasn't like I could go back. I was on, I was in an awkward position. I had to go for it. And, so yeah, I did. And
was it
my
dyno?
buddy Paul, what?
Was it a dyno?
No.
No.
And my buddy Paul caught me, and I was like, when I caught, it was a pretty violent catch. Like my middle, like pushed, it basically like arced hard at the harness. My back went back, and my legs went down, and my back
horrible.
and abs were sore for like a week.
Really?
Yeah.
Dang. Do you have any other issues now? Like, this has been a couple weeks.
You're
still feeling.
I got scrapes on my shin
some
and
scrapes.
That's it. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I'm glad you're okay.
Generally
it
was a pretty safe thing. Like, I didn't really have anything go wrong. Paul caught me like 7 feet off the ground.
Oh my God.
So it was so I
enough.
fell almost 25 feet, and then that's where I stopped, was 7 feet off the ground. So that particular pitch like started over here and arced up like that, and I fell from up here. So I was down like next to him, and I just had him lower me, and then he helped get the gear back that I had led with, and I lowered him off. We left a little bit of bail gear, and he came down, and we bailed and did other stuff. In fact, that was the day that you and I slacklined. That was that morning. Yeah. And so that
Yeah, so you remember like these little minute details about this fall, and would you say that you remember like most all of your climbs and like canyons that you've gone through?
I remember it all, but a lot of it runs together.
It runs together a little bit, but like out of all your collective memories, is that what like is ingrained the most?
You mean falls?
Oh, I'm just like your climbs, like just in general, like the things that you can remember the most clearly. Like, is it your climbing stuff?
I definitely remember
those wild experiences where you're in that flow state, and
interesting.
It's like you're probably able, like if I like coaxed you through like some other stories that you hadn't thought about in a while, you probably like remember.
Yeah, I mean,
pick a date on a
what
calendar.
comes to my mind immediately is backcountry skiing, because that's my other favorite thing to do.
Okay,
and
backcountry skiing.
I think of moments, runs and couloirs and stuff I've done that, those are some of the most exciting, joyous moments of my life for sure. But yeah, climbs like summits, just like this year,
free and floaty.
Yeah, this year I got 3 big alpine climbs.
A
couple of them I had wanted to do for. Like hoped that I could get to where I could do them forever.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of them, this was my 3rd attempt. The other 2 times that we'd gotten weathered out. And then, I guess I do remember the near-death experiences pretty clearly.
Right.
This was actually the 2nd time Paul saved my life this year. In the spring, we were ice climbing out by Wolf Creek, and I took my first and last and only lead ice fall, and I fell quite a ways because one of the screws pulled, so it was the next screw down that caught me.
Oh my gosh.
And Paul, when he was belaying me and when he saw that I fell, he locked off and jumped back, and it went tight, but then that screw pulled, and then it got loose again, and he took more in and jumped back more, and then eventually caught me. And
oh my God,
that was, because you're not supposed to. Basically, with ice lead, the standard is you do not fall. You're covered in sharp stuff. It's just all this extra danger, and you're not supposed to fall. So that was like a wake up for me. I was pushing it too much. That was like a hard lesson. It's hard to admit this, but I will. I'm a pretty new ice leader. I've only been leading ice for a couple of seasons, and in this moment, I was feeling fairly confident, and I was hanging on my left tool on the ice, and I had put my right tool in the ice and let it go, which is not unusual. That's fine. But then I turned around to wave to my friends, and the angle change on the tool of doing that broke the ice, and then I fell, and then that tool stayed in my hand.
Hi, I'm coming down for you.
My right tool was on a leash to my harness, and it pulled out of the ice and came down with me, but didn't like hit me.
Luckily, yes.
Thankfully, my crampons thankfully didn't catch the ice and flip me upside down and slam me in. They didn't even touch. Mm-hmm. So I fell all the way down, came to a stop basically without touching anything, and realized that I was okay. I was still holding that tool. The other one was hanging down. I pulled it up. I caught my breath. I thought about, what had just happened, and realized, that was a mistake I cannot be making. And then I finished the climb.
You climbed back up there?
Yeah, I went back up and finished it, which was good for my head.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to fall on ice lead again. I'm going to keep it chill.
No waving to the crowd.
What?
No waving to the crowd.
No, no waving.
Oh, I'm glad you shared that. That's amazing. Yeah, that's the reason I asked that, is because I feel like my hunting experiences, like whenever there's like the hunt of that elk and the deer behind us, like I remember like every moment within that whole scope, and those are like the memories I go to. The things I remember the most, like
the bears and the mountain lion.
The bear, the mountain lion. I mean, we could tell stories forever about this stuff. And that was so crazy, that mountain lion. It still like shakes me up. Like I was going through some stuff a little bit at the time, and then this traumatic experience happened. And then it like triggered a bunch of stuff that I've been like working on, and it was weird how traumatic and scary that was, and then what came up after it. And I'm not going to go too much into detail about that, but it's just those situations when you're near death, or it's just on the line. You remember that stuff, and those collections, like life is sort of about the collections of these stories of adventures and experiences. Like I've had plenty of things, right? Like I don't even remember what I've had, like materialistic things. Like I'll remember this table.
Yeah, you made it
because I built this table, and it came from a place where I built a house, and like that's a thing that is I've touched like so many times, from cutting it down to milling it to, I'm just like, and then waiting a year and a half and just having it be around and all that stuff. Like I'll remember this table, but that's because it's been in a collection of mini stories throughout the last 2 years of my life. And things like that are beautiful. Just the natural experiences, those woodworking, I feel like is very innate and natural, and climbing and skiing and venturing like that, like exploring what's over the hill. That's what life is all about.
It's definitely what I put most of my effort into. That's definitely, it's also for me very much the people that I'm with when I'm adventuring. Like, there's not much that I do solo other than what?
Your brothers, your sisters, your community.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, is the people that I do stuff with. Because the only things I really do solo are trail running, which, I mean, that's a pretty special headspace too.
Sure.
But yeah, like the experiences of, adventure, and honestly, because I'm not doing first ascents or first descents.
Sure.
To me, it doesn't even seem. that adventurous, because people who are really doing stuff that's the first time anyone's done it. That's the wild adventure. And I have friends who do some of that. I haven't approached that level yet. I'm happy just being able to get up or down things that are hard as I push for. I mean, like it's your own limits too. Sure. What's hard for me can be not hard for someone else. And even just based on the current conditions. Sure. So, but yeah, that pushing and going through the suffering to have those incredible highs, like backcountry skiing. I mean, it's hours of climbing, frustrating, difficult, terrain
right there
to get to where you end up having, minutes of absolute ecstasy of, incredible powder. And I mean, I was just talking with someone about, we did this one like in the bottom of Yellowstone, just north of Jackson Hole, called 25 Short. It's like 3,500 foot run. And we were there like after a huge dump. I mean, it took us hours to climb it.
Sure.
But then it was an unforgettable, ride down. I'll never forget that. I mean, that was amazing. And then earlier this year, we did a couple coolars up off of Cameron Pass. And
oh yeah, I've been up at Cameron Pass. We have got USGS gauging stations up there.
Yeah, that wilderness is amazing around there.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's incredible up there. So the area we went to the No-Koo Crags, which is a cirque with several coolars, and we skied a couple of them. So like when you look at a picture of mountains, there'll be like a string, a line of snow between the rock.
Chute?
Yeah, those typically, same thing. And I'm not probably pronouncing it the right way. People say it in different ways, but
I just kind of forgot what the term is.
The European way of pronouncing it's way different. I'm not even sure the right way, but I call them coolars. And, so in the right conditions, you can climb them and ski them. And we had awesome conditions and skied. It was the steepest thing I've ever skied when we did that this year. And
do you remember what the pitch is?
It was like 45.
What's the borderline for avalanche? Isn't it like 38 or 36? Where
anything between 30 and 45 is Abbey terrain.
Yeah.
I mean, plus you got to think about above. I mean, there's a lot of considerations. I've been doing backcountry since early 2000s.
Okay.
And,
you've been out here since 2000.
I came to Colorado. I've been here pretty much since 95.
95. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, our business was incorporated in 96.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
We really got going more in 97, but.
So there were computers back then. Not
yeah.
trying to ding you.
The web was
the World Wide Web,
like first kind of available to the public through dial-up in like 94 is kind of when it started getting more widespread.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you had this harebrained idea, or did you go to
business
school for?
No, I didn't go to college.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't
so
want to.
You didn't go to college. You're like, I'm gonna do.
I wanted to go out in the world and learn from the people who were doing things that I was interested in. That was my goal in high school. Honestly, I didn't even want to finish high school. I was so jaded on the bureaucracy, but my mom convinced me to. Yeah, actually, I talked my way out of high school. I had an interview with the superintendent of the San Diego Unified School District.
Interesting.
He cleared me to not have to go to school anymore.
That's awesome. I'm sure everyone wants to know the secret. What did you say?
I think just the sheer fact that I wound up making an appointment and having a discussion about what I knew and didn't know and what I wanted to do and what I've done and where I was going. And he realized that, another year or two of high school wasn't going to be a factor for me.
Sure.
I also was sure that I didn't want to go to college. I was done with bureaucracy at that point.
Yeah.
And, but my mom was she couldn't handle it. She was there with me during the interview. She experienced it all.
17, 16?
I was probably 16 when I did
16.
that. And then, so I did my last year of school, and I basically just I had multiple periods of auto shop and
right,
and theater and graphic arts
cool.
and like all cool stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, I moved to Colorado originally because my best friend from high school had come out here to go to CU, and he met my business partner at CU, and they both dropped out in the first semester. My friend, because he just partied and wasn't going to school, and my business partner, because the computer science department at CU was really beneath him. He'd been making software and selling it to stockbrokers since he was 16. And
really,
he was when I met him, he was making and selling software in the human telemedicine market.
Oh man.
And so I met him and we became good friends, and my buddy and I went and tried to live in the mountains, stayed up there for a couple months, and then didn't find a place we could afford to stay. It was easy to work, but hard to find a place to live. And then wound up back in San Diego for a while. And then I moved back out here in 95 to work with my business partner and learn how to program and really my goal is to learn how to make money with computers, because I figured eventually I could be, traveling and make money. That was, I figured if I could make money with computers, I could be anywhere and make money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he and I got along good, and he was down to like guide me. And, really the way I learned to program was he introduced me to an emergency room doctor who had an idea for a software product. And, my buddy said, yeah, you can make this. And I was like, I had no idea how to make what this guy wanted, but my friend told me, I'll guide you through it. And so I signed a contract with this emergency room doctor telling him that I would make this product for him. And
well, I'm going to figure out how to make this product for you. We're not going to tell you that.
And I did it, and
that's
and
awesome.
My buddy guided me through it, and I made it. And then
that's
I've been programming ever since.
Okay. So you knew like in high school you wanted to make money off of computers,
not until
you met that person.
I mean, I was always interested in computers.
Sure.
My dad exposed me to computers young. My dad's an attorney, and he got into computers in the early 80s, and did all of his, documents on computers. So I was exposed to them young, and he always encouraged me to be into them. So I always had access, but I wasn't a programmer until I came out here. Right. That was really when I first learned to program. I had done some basic stuff in elementary school, because they had like I think it was Apple IIs,
right?
And we did some basic stuff, but I didn't like stick with it and build anything of note. But but I've always been logical, like that. Right. Logic's almost too logical. I think extremely logically. So programming I think programming, if you're logical and willful, that's really what it takes.
Right.
Because it's the willingness to
learn the tools, and then
just being able to just never, because what is it? It's problem solving. If you're able to continuously face whatever the next problem is and just never stop problem solving and learning and being in that uncomfortable state of not knowing how you're going to accomplish what you need to accomplish next, and just dig until
to your lifestyle of climbing.
Interesting. Yeah, there is a lot of overlap, I guess. Yeah, it's weird because I feel like I'm still like I live too comfortable. Like I'm still always trying to get out of my comfort zone.
Still not content yet.
More like it's just wanting to. It's just believing I can do more, challenge myself more, wanting to. I'm not where I want to be yet. I'm still I'm still working at that.
Like where you want to be as a climber, or as like just a human with your skill set. What do you mean by where you want to be?
Like levels
Financially?
of financially, levels of freedom, relationship,
Right.
even spirituality,
Sure.
even physicality. Like I'm still getting like stronger and more physically skilled. Like it just keeps getting better because I keep getting things more dialed, like nutrition and just routine, and I keep getting better and better. I mean, it's a constant seeking for sure, but and I don't know that I'll ever be satisfied, but I'm also really happy. Like I really enjoy my life. Like, I do get to,
you've got a great life. You set yourself up well with saying no to high school, no to college, starting your own business, getting to travel and climb and being successful, and you have your own place, and
I mean, there's
you're a work in progress to your own
work
to
in
your
progress.
own, like not my like judgment or anything, but your judgment. You're a work in progress, which is, I mean, I think we're all in a work in progress. Like, I don't think I'm anywhere near my full potential as a human.
Yeah, me
like
either.
Spiritually, physically, like I'm still getting stronger too. Like I feel like high school football was when I was the strongest I've ever been. And I don't think I've ever weighed as much as I did at that point either. But now I feel like I'm even stronger. And this is like how many years later? Like 15 years later, I feel like I'm just able to still build strength and work on things and be able to have those experiences. Like for me, I'm huge into the elk hunting, and I do love to climb, and I'm looking forward to hopefully coming on some climbing adventures.
Sure, dude.
For me, moving out here, I wanted to find a climbing community like right away. I literally didn't climb at all until I met you guys. Since I've been out here, I was dirt biking and adventure biking and just hiking or whatever, but you kind of have to have a community for climbing. I mean, feel like
even that I did in an unusual way.
Right.
Cause this guy who was a client, I don't know if I told you this, the way I got into climbing.
No, but shoot.
A guy who worked for one of our clients and I became friends. He was older, probably 15 years older than me at the time. And, he got out of climbing. He'd been a climber his whole life, mountaineering, rock climbing, ice, everything. And he was climbing with his wife and she dropped him on his head.
Oh my goodness.
She was belaying, and I don't know exactly what happened, but her belay failed and he fell and had a head injury and like some brain damage.
Wow.
And, I mean, this was prior to my knowing him, but it affected him significantly. And so he was done climbing, and he knew I was interested in climbing because once I knew about his background, I was always asking him questions because I was curious. And he ended up selling me like all of his gear for $400. And
nice.
I mean, it was probably, there's still things that I got from that I've never used that are like, I know what they are now, but I haven't I have like a rack of pitons, which, I've never done.
Sounds cool.
So that's like the old, like what you use a hammer to pound into cracks in rock, like iron pieces, they're pieces of wedged metal. Like that's how the pioneers of Yosemite put up the big walls and stuff. And there's still people who use pitons on some routes, but they're damaging to the rock, so it's ethically very rare to use unless you're in like super remote. Like if you're going to go put up a route in Baffin Island, I'm sure you're going to use pitons, but that's not a typical thing you use free climbing. And so I bought all this gear off him, and then he gave me on my desk the book How to Rock Climb by John Long, which I highly recommend. It's a fantastic book.
Oh, I should look at that book.
It's super good. And John Long's super entertaining writer.
Okay.
He was one of the like later generation pioneers of Yosemite. He was on the team that first climbed the nose in a day, the nose of El Capitan.
Okay.
But then he went on to like a full media career. I think he's like, he made I don't know. Like he's a very good writer. He's written a lot of books but I think he made movies and TV. I'm not really sure what all else. I just know he was into media and, he's just funny. But that book, I already knew how to use belay devices because John Long. I already knew how to use like belay devices because I had rappelled and I had climbed like once in Boy Scouts. But I didn't really know how to climb. Yeah. But I read the book. I taught my roommate how to belay. So I had someone to go with, and then we went and I tried to climb something that's like still like hard for me. I didn't know the ratings. Like, so we went out to the South Platte and tried to climb Sheep's Nose, which is a 4-pitch 5'9" trad climb. Like it's a big 600-foot dome.
That sounds wild.
And I didn't make it up the first pitch. I took 3 huge falls on a hex, like a hunk of metal in a crack. So I placed it appropriately. It worked.
Sure. 3 times.
But I didn't make it past that. And then it was 3 more times I went and tried to climb that like over time before I finally summited it. And now I've been on top of it a few times. What?
That's badass.
Yeah. And but then I realized, what ratings were, and that 5'9" was harder than I wanted to start at. And then I found some easier stuff. And my buddy my roommate who I taught how to belay was afraid of heights, but he was willing to go with me for a while. Like after a while, he was like, I don't really like doing this. And I found friends off of rockclimbing.com to
rockclimbing.com. That's awesome.
Which was before Mountain Project.
Mountain Project.
Now Mountain Project would be the place. You could find partners on there. But yeah, so pretty much taught myself that too, which is not the typical way. Back then I think there might have only been one climbing gym in Denver, that Thrill Seekers, which I hadn't gone there when I started outdoor climbing, but later I got into it because then later I realized like being able to climb multiple times in a week indoors is such a strength building thing.
Sure.
So then I actually lived near where Thrill Seekers was. It has since closed a few years ago. But that was, it was a cool little gym, and I went there for years, and, now I climb in gyms all the time because, it's fun and it's training.
Right. Yeah. I just got that membership a couple weeks, like 2-3 weeks ago or something. And I've been going a bunch, and it's like that first time I went with you guys, like that was the first time I climbed in a long time. And it's just interesting how your muscles start to just harden up a little bit for those moves where like you normally like maybe fall away from the wall, but it like you can become a little bit more Spider-Man after. Oh yeah, after just
the more you do it.
5-6 times at a bouldering gym, you see improvements. Well, I have, and
absolutely,
and it's fun. It's awesome.
Yeah,
I love the climbing gyms around here. Back in Madison, there was one climbing gym, and it was not close to anything, and it was okay, but it was like the far east side of Madison, and I was, wasn't ever over there or anything. I probably went there like 3 or 4 times, but there's gyms all over here. We're in Colorado.
It's crazy how many there are.
There's a bunch of gyms. And that moving place, I'll work out, climb, and do yoga all in one night. Yeah. And it's like the best. Like then I'm just like, okay, now I can sleep tonight.
Totally. It's really a great deal.
Stay there for like 3 or 4 hours and just, because for me, like if I just work out for like an hour or something, like I still have a ton of energy. And those long duration type workouts for like when I'm hunting is huge because I've got a big pack on, then I'm on and off all day, and I'm, going up through terrain and covering miles, but doing it in a way that you're like ninja walking, which takes a lot of strength.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Definitely
you're
more
not just
effort.
Clapping along and
totally
doing
to be
whatever.
Quiet with a pack.
Quiet with a pack, and you're doing this sort of saunter. all day, that like requires training. That's like a half a day, or like these canyon trip adventures, or just like, that's why my lifestyle is so long adventures on the weekends, which is training for those grueling elk hunts or deer hunts or bear hunts or whatever it is, where I'm just camping for 3 nights, living out of the backpack, and literally going all day long hunting. And it's cool to have, gyms around here to get that, extra boost, because if I'm not, like, I know, like, if I put my pack on and I haven't been training, like, I would come out here from Wisconsin every year hunting, and I would try to train, kind of, but my lifestyle was not like it is here. Like, here I'm training, like, every week, every weekend, all year long, and you just build that strength. Like, back home would be like, okay, I'm do yoga, like, once a week or something. I don't really like weight training. I'm getting more into it now, just because I'm trying to build like muscle and strength to mountain climb. But there's more opportunity here, and I love it here. It's great. You've been here for a long time. It's sort of the spot. Granted,
it's amazing how much opportunity for outdoors adventure there is here.
Yeah. Oh, it's a huge playground. Huge playground.
I mean, yeah, the density in the metro area is frustrating at times.
It's hard to get away from people, for sure. Like to go out and about.
You can. I tend to be pretty good at that, but it's also the things I'm doing are.
There's not people doing that.
Yeah, it's definitely a subset of the people who are outdoors. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously there's people around when you're going to climb in like Eldo, but like my buddies and I, our backcountry, we do a lot of backcountry in areas that people don't tend to be. So, I mean, I don't know. I definitely managed to get away from people a lot. Like, I mean, and then canyoneering, that's obviously big drives to get out to Utah, but then we're out, we don't see anybody when we're out doing that stuff.
I was more so thinking like, well, one of my dogs is a little bit dog aggressive, so I can't bring him where other people's dogs are.
Like you have to parks.
Yeah, you can't take him to the dog park. You have to go like 2 hours. Like, otherwise you're for sure, and even at 2 hours, depending on where you're at, you're going to see somebody else with their dog. Anywhere you go, almost.
I'll show you a spot.
Okay, sweet. Because I need a place to go where Woody can swim. There's no other dogs, and we can just have a ball. Like, that's sort of my goal.
Yeah. Like, I don't know about the swim part, but the trails, there's definitely, I know, some places.
Okay. So what else do you like about Colorado? Or I guess, what do you not like about Colorado? Maybe.
Well, I mean, I personally am not the biggest fan of the mentality of every neighborhood needing to increase density.
Okay.
So I'm pretty involved in the city I live in, Inglewood. Okay. And be interesting if anyone from Inglewood ends up.
Oh, dude, they're all over my podcast.
Yeah, right. I like, so like where my house is. My house is in an R1 district, which means it's single family homes.
Sure.
And then I have an alley, and across the alley is R2, which means you can have on the same size lot 2 homes. But they were all mostly from the 50s, single family homes on all those lots. And in my neighborhood, they've basically scraped all the single family homes and put up giant duplexes and sold each half for, 800 plus.
Okay.
And, there it's legal. That's okay.
Sure.
But now the city is pushing to even change like R1 into being able to have
more
additional
than one.
Yeah, so the increased density, it's like the mentality of people who get into city planning seems to be that the ultimate goal is to have everybody live in high rises and not have a car. And, I have no problem with people who want to live that way. And,
Sure.
but not everywhere needs to be that way. And, unfortunately, the people who are involved in city planning tend to all be people who have that perspective of wanting increased density. That's like everything they're all about. And that's frustrating. So I've been getting more and more involved in my city to try and have some influence on the opposite aspect of that,
So are you going to city council meetings and things like that? Or just writing
well,
letters?
I've been on multiple committees and boards for the city.
Okay.
I served on the Board of Adjustment and Appeals in Inglewood for 12 years till I was term limited. Board of Adjustment and Appeals is anyone who wants to do anything outside the building code has to get a variance. And so the Board of Adjustment and Appeals is the board that approves or denies variances for any construction. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot being on that board. I mean, when I first got on that board, I was one of only a couple people who wasn't an attorney. The rest of the board was all attorneys or architects. And the building code, it's a fat document. Like, it's a huge book of rules, and learning how to understand it and be able to rule on variance requests took a lot of learning, and it was a lot of experience, but I got into it. I mean, I've always been technical. I'm really good at contracts. Our business is all about intellectual property, right? So we've done a ton of creative intellectual property contracts over the years and worked with a lot of different, attorneys to get, we have a really, I'm really proud of our contracts for our company. We have a very unusual way of doing software development where we basically get paid to build things that we own.
That sounds logical.
Well, it's a great deal if you can get it, deal. Right? Exactly. But it's not easy to pull that off, but we've done that.
Sure.
And, so
that's awesome.
I've always been drawn to, like, I'm good at language. Like, I enjoy complex contracts. I'm also real into win-win. So the details of dealing with building code, it appealed to me. I enjoyed it.
Sure.
And I got really good education from people who were on the board, before me. And then I think my last 5 years on that board, until I was term limited, the board every year voted me chair. So then I got a bunch of experience chairing a board as well. And since then I've been on multiple city committees. Currently I'm the chair of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee in Inglewood. And I was recently the chair of this committee that went on for a couple years to evaluate whether Inglewood would go to a single hauler system instead of, like, right now in the city of Inglewood, every homeowner has to make an arrangement with a trash hauler. It's not provided by the city. It's in the municipal code that you have to have trash service, but not who you get it from. So you can get it from any provider you want. And there's, say 4 different providers that provide it in the city.
Disorganized a little bit.
Well, there's positives and pluses and minuses, right? Because if it's a competitive market, then you can potentially get a good deal. Yeah. But it also means that on one block, there might be 4 trash trucks that have to come to that block on trash day.
That's what I was thinking. Which is economically,
the argument is mainly environmental.
Environmentally.
Because if you've got 4 trucks hitting a single block in one day instead of one, it's environmentally potentially, more emissions, more wear and tear on alleys and streets. There's a lot of downsides from that perspective. And the people who run the city very much want to force it into a city-run single hauler system.
Sure.
For environmental reasons, but also I think in budget and control reasons as well. So there was a big push for that, and the city council created a citizen committee to evaluate whether the city should consider doing that or not.
Sure.
So this committee was formed to make a recommendation to city council as to whether they should move forward with a single hauler program or not. I got onto that. I applied and got appointed onto that committee. And then we started meeting, and we found out as soon as we started meeting that the city staff had already made an RFP, a request for proposal, and put it out to haulers, and which to me made no sense, because the city had multiple public meetings about this, and it's a very hot topic. A lot of hundreds of people showed up to these meetings.
Makes sense. And hugely it's environmental.
Well, most of the people who were showing up were not concerned about the environment. They were concerned about, they wanted alley service, which a lot of the haulers are trying to move away from, because they're trying to use bigger trucks with automated arms and fewer people. And the alleys aren't wide enough to be able to accommodate the giant trucks that they can maximize profits with.
So instead of the guy jumping out and throwing the barrel, dumping the barrel in the back. Well,
they have automated trucks that can go down the alleys. It just still takes a human to move the can to the back of the truck where the automated arm is, instead of driving down a street and the arm can grab
the side.
Yeah. So, but we have alleys, and if you have a house with an alley, having your trash and recycling on the alley is ideal compared to having to have it in front of your front house, and you're stinking and there's a lot of
cars
hills
parked and stuff.
Yeah, and there's totally, especially as they're increasing density and parking's getting more difficult, and so there's less room at the curb for trash cans, so they're increasing density at the same time as wanting to push this direction. Anyway, so most of the concern of the public, the hundreds of people who showed up, was that they wanted alley service, which some of the haulers were stopping providing, right? They were moving away from providing it. And then they wanted yard waste included, which traditionally you can put yard waste out next to your cans, and that's just included. They take that away. Like if you trim trees or have, bags of grass or whatever, that was always included, not extra fees. And they care about cost. And the city RFP didn't take most of that into account, even though hundreds of people had shown up and made these, strong opinions. So I participated in the committee and helped make the movement towards getting the committee to agree to recommend to city council to throw out the original RFP and have us make a new one, which led to a 2-year process of us making a new RFP, because we got city council to agree to that. They threw out the original RFP, canceled what had been put out. We spent a year and a half in probably the most contentious group I've ever been in, because a lot of the people on the committee, the majority, don't care about service levels, don't care about cost, only care about their perception of what's good for the environment. And there are a few of us who care about all those things. And most citizens care about the biggest thing was alley service and yard waste and cost for the citizens. But there's people push agendas, whether separate from what people really want. And so and I ended up chair of this committee, even though the majority of them disagreed with my perspective, which was a difficult position because there was a lot of contentiousness. I mean, honestly, I had a lot of anxiety going into a lot of our meetings, and it was like twice a month for most of 2 years. And a lot of preparation, a lot of preparation. But ultimately, after some serious fiascos around things that happened on that, including, I don't know, that's quite a story. I'll just say, ultimately, I'm really proud that the outcome of our committee was a unanimous consensus recommendation to city council to reject the 2 responses to our new RFP, because neither response satisfied the requirements of it. And to negotiate with the haulers to get, this set of points that we laid out. If you can get these things, including, a max price including yard waste including alley service, all the things that I wanted, which was really difficult, but somehow managed to get everyone to agree to make this recommendation. We made the recommendation to city council. Then there was public hearings where tons of people showed up and spoke. And ultimately city council, instead of doing what our recommendation was, which was to try to renegotiate, because even on city council, there was disagreement about what they really wanted, they threw the whole thing out. So now we're back to where we started.
Oh my goodness.
But to me, that's better than what the city staff was pushing for. Because if it had gone through the way the city staff was pushing, it would have become single hauler. We would have lost alley service. We would have lost yard waste included, and the cost would have gone up.
Yeah,
that's what city staff was doing. So I'm glad
there's
that
an
we didn't
agenda
end up there.
somewhere in there, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Oh, man.
But yeah, I mean, I get involved. Actually, this week I had an interview with the county because you probably don't know about this, but it was probably before you got here. But in our last big election, Colorado, the state, had a new change to our constitution. It's an anti-gerrymandering law.
Okay.
Which is really cool. I voted for it. It's a neat improvement.
Keep talking. I'm gonna let Avery out quick.
All right. I can hear you. Okay. It's a neat improvement to the so basically in the Constitution, it says that every state within it has to, every 10 years, utilize census data to relay out voting districts based on the number of people, et cetera. And what's happened is that's been gamed all over the country. And that's what the word gerrymandering is. So gerrymandering is it's whoever's in power at a time when the census data is processed every 10 years, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they draw the lines for the districts all crazy to make it favor their party. That's what gerrymandering is. So every 10 years in the Constitution, we have to redistrict based on census data. But the framers didn't realize how it was going to be gamed by the parties.
Sure.
The parties have done that. So many parts of the country, if you look at the voting districts, there are these crazy lines that favor whatever party was in power when they processed the data. So Colorado had a new law designed to not have that happen. And I thought it was great. It's basically every
Makes
voting
sense.
district has to create a citizen committee of 9 citizens, 3 Republican, 3 Democrat, 3 independent. And then they get to decide how to break up the district when they process the census data. So this law passed, I think, on the last presidential election. And the census happened in 2020, but because of the pandemic, it hadn't been processed yet. So the state has not processed the new census data yet. That's happening next year. And so now all of the counties are forming these citizen committees for the first time. And I live in Arapahoe County. And so I applied and I got interviewed by the county commissioners on Tuesday night. So you have to represent the party that you were registered at during the last presidential election. So I'm independent. Okay. I was independent.
Sure.
And so I'm going for one of the 3 independent slots on that committee. But
that's pretty badass.
I think my interview went really well.
That's awesome.
I hope I'll find out in like a month if
if you're talking about like how many chairs you've been on committees and all this stuff, that's pretty impressive. I have no experience with any of that. And yeah, I'm following, but I'm also learning and trying to understand all at the same time.
I mean, the census data processing and redistricting, that'll be new to me, but I'm like, sure. I mean, I am like, I'm a data person. Like I've designed, complex data systems for 25 years. And
okay. So that's okay. So that's what you do with your,
I mean, we've done everything.
You've done everything.
Because we're a small company that's worked
with
tons of different companies. We've worked in, many different industries, but I mean, it's always designing.
Done pharmaceutical stuff?
Not pharma, but definitely medical. For 6 years, I built veterinary telemedicine software, which is really cool.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, Yeah, so we've done a decent amount of medical, and then a lot of supply chain software, e-commerce systems, a lot of integration, a ton of data synchronization, a lot of stuff on top of,
Sure.
like extending applications and integrating. Everything's data driven.
So now you're probably working for like Pfizer and Moderna.
Yeah,
and
right.
Making
No.
like supporting them and making software for them, right? Like, is that
No,
your
that's
thing?
funny. You're picking on me because I'm like,
Well, I mean, look at your shirt. What does
well,
your shirt say?
stop the mandates. That's freedom, man.
That is freedom. That's freedom.
That's about freedom.
Vaccinated,
if
unvaccinated,
people want to,
Democrat, Republican,
yeah, this is
united we stand in peace.
I went to
Okay.
the Stop the Mandates rallies in DC and LA this year.
Nice.
Where the scientists and doctors who've been on the side of actual science were, sharing their information. I mean, the people that I've been learning from and following, which is the opposite of what the CDC and FDA have been pushing, which is
who are you like following most or like studying up with?
I mean, mention some of the legit doctors and scientists, sure.
Yeah.
Dr. Urso, Dr. McCullough, Dr. Merrick, Dr. Corey. There's so many who've been on the side of early treatment, which is totally possible and super effective, far more effective than the failed experimental gene therapies labeled as vaccines that are, super wrongly being mandated, that have negative efficacy. If you look at the actual data, which all countries besides the US show, since the US data is totally bastardized and screwed. Fauci should hang. So should Gates.
Right.
And it's not going to end until Fauci and Gates and Klaus Schwab and until they're tried. We need Nuremberg 2.0 trials. They're not going to stop doing what they're doing, which is absolutely anti-human, anti-science, until they're stopped. They're not going to stop until they're stopped. They're too far into it. I mean, it's unfortunately.
Are there like are there certain groups or?
Well, the FLCCC is a fantastic. If you have any interest in like real data and science about how to deal with SARS-CoV-2 infection, FLCCC would be the place to start. Their protocols have been evolving throughout because they've kept, thousands, if not millions of people out of hospitals through effective early treatment protocols. And now they're very focused on vaccine injury protocols and helping people get over the vaccine injuries, which is massively widespread, whether you realize it, believe it or not.
Yeah, there's some statistic, like some 80% of people had like issues, cardiac issues from the Moderna. I mean, we don't have to specifically go numbers, but
I'm not super clear on what you're referring to there, but there was a recent study that hasn't been challenged out of Thailand that 30% of young males that were vaccinated, they hadn't yet presented in the hospital with like heart problems, but they scanned them and looked, and 30% have heart issues from being vaccinated. There's all kinds of crazy numbers.
Who was that guy, that really super crazy fitness guy that he was like 62
who
or
just
something?
died?
Yeah, he
had
died.
Posted about, if I die, then
if
you're
I
right.
die, yeah, if I die from being
I don't know his details. But I mean, individual anecdotes are not very useful. Everybody's got anecdotes, people who have bought into the, the lies around the vaccines have all their anecdotes about, I know somebody who died who wasn't vaccinated. I mean, the reality is vitamin D level is the most associative thing with hospitalization and death. Like if
Factor,
if your vitamin D is at least 50 nanograms per deciliter, then your chances of a poor outcome from COVID, separate from all other factors, is massively reduced. That alone. And vitamin D is like the cheapest supplement. We could have widespread delivered that to everyone in the country. I mean, the US's hospitalization and death rates are among the highest in the world, even though we spend the most on healthcare and supposedly have the best, it's ridiculous.
It's frustrating. So overall, what do you think the lies are that
safe and effective?
That's
a total lie.
So safe and effective, total lie.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's like the main one, right? Like,
yeah,
they have the stories on these commercials of, oh, give it to your kids and whatever.
Well, they just, in the last 2 days, one of the most insane things it keeps getting more insane. I mean, there's never been any data to justify a risk benefit analysis to give it to a healthy kid. Anyone, I mean, European countries were banning it for people 30 and under. They kept raising it, banning it. The UK banned it for 12 and under recently. The US, the CDC, over the last 2 days had unanimous votes to put it on their recommended childhood vaccine schedule, which is likely to be adopted by many states in ways of forcing it on kids to have access to public school, which is insane.
God.
Because
that is insane.
It's terrifying. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. And California
Can't
just passed a law that makes it illegal for a doctor to be a doctor. Like, what is a doctor supposed to do? A doctor is supposed to have a relationship with a patient where they evaluate that patient and work with that patient to figure out what makes sense for that patient on an individual basis. That's what the practice of medicine has always been.
Sure.
And part of what's happening with this captured CDC, captured FDA, captured NIH, captured meaning captured by pharma and whatever else leads up to the World Economic Forum and the globalist movement, which is, I'm against it. I don't want it. I don't want any part of it. I know that we could go into what all is coming down the pike from that stuff, but just staying with, the insanity of the pushing, I don't like to call them vaccines. The statutory definition to this day of what a vaccine is not what these are.
Yeah.
mRNA was designed to cross the blood-brain barrier to deliver experimental cancer treatments to people who had nothing left, no options left. And now they've widespread changed people's genes and DNA, as the studies have now shown, where your cells are turned into these toxic spike factories, including in many of your organs and your brain. And there's no off switch.
Those spike proteins that they talk
for an
about.
Extinct version of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. I mean, it's insane is the only word, but it's also the reason that they're, all of these bought and paid for supposed scientists on these boards are voting this stuff in and putting it on the vaccine schedule is if it gets onto the childhood vaccine schedule, because of the structure of this super bad law from the 80s, the vaccine companies, the manufacturers, become permanently free of liability. So under emergency use authorization, they didn't have any liability. But then once it's approved, they have liability. But the way they got around that is the version of, so like Pfizer, their vaccine, it's not a vaccine. I'll make that clear. I'll use the word because everyone calls it that. Their vaccine, they supposedly got approved by the corrupt, captured FDA, which means that they actually have liability for it. But the way they got around it is the version of it that's approved, they called Comirnaty, and they didn't make that available in the US. Nobody in the US has been able to get the actual approved version of the vaccine and got it with liability. They only have had the version of it that's not called Comirnaty, that's supposedly the same formula, but that's under emergency use authorization, which gives them no liability.
Okay.
Once they have an approved vaccine, get onto the recommended childhood vaccine schedule, that gives them permanent freedom from liability based on our screwed up laws. Now, in the 80s, this law was created to give manufacturers no liability for vaccines because, the argument was the manufacturer said, well, if we have, because they had made some bad ones and they hadn't tested them well enough and people got hurt and the manufacturers got sued and they said, okay, well, we're not going to make vaccines because it's too much liability. So we need to be free of liability if we're going to make vaccines. So they passed this law. And back then there was, 6 or 7 vaccines on the childhood schedule. Now there's like 52. And once they got free of liability, they went gangbusters on making money with vaccines. They've in court of law, they've been sued. They've had to admit that they did not do placebo-controlled safety trials on any of the new vaccines. None of them.
Interesting.
So the childhood vaccine schedule is totally hurting kids. It's not a positive thing. And then if you want to, it goes deep on, there's actually a book, I just found out about it, that I'm really excited to read. It's by, don't really know. It's interesting because the science and data that disputes the narrative of vaccines are safe and effective. Part of the way that the propaganda or, the people behind the propaganda manage to keep pushing their propaganda is anyone who speaks out against it, they take their medical license, they come after them on an individual basis. It's not about the science. They don't argue about the data. So there were these some Israeli scientists wrote a book. I think it's a group of them, and they wrote it in Hebrew, and it goes deep, but it's very accessible in understanding the real story of what's going on with vaccines from a data standpoint, and what they've actually, basically that it's a crock. And
interesting.
They wrote this book, but they did it anonymously because they want the by taking their names out of it, it can't be discredited by the standard pointing at individuals and coming down on them. And it stands on its own. It stands on its own. And so the criticism can only be about the data. The data is solid. I mean, there's actually a bounty. If anyone can find anything in the book that's not true, they can get $1,000.
Interesting.
And
I want to read this book for sure.
And it was just recently translated into English and published. I don't remember the name of it. I wrote it down. I'll get it to you.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. But I mean, anyway, I don't want to go too far into all this, but I'm definitely like, if you want to inject experimental shit in yourself or your kids, I don't think you should do it to your kids, but yourself, fine. But there was never any justification to force it on anyone else or to take anyone's rights away if they don't want it. And so, defeat the mandates. I've been all about medical freedom. And one thing that's been one of the most frustrating things to me is how anyone can claim that they're pro-choice at the same time as thinking that mandates for experimental injections is somehow justified.
There's a topic.
I mean, I'm for full medical freedom. I think everyone should be able to do what they want with their body and not have any limitations on their life based on what their choices are for their own body.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. And there's many things that have been going on, especially in the last 5-10 years, probably because I've been more aware, but it's just things that blow my mind about what's going on in our country and the systems, and I don't know how these things even come about, other than the fact that it's all an agenda being pushed by a certain person for money.
Yeah, I don't know if it's money or control. I mean,
control, and like there's the conspiracy theories of
depopulation.
Yeah, depopulation, all this stuff, except for that the local want increased density and they want you to get vaccinated or whatever.
Well,
like,
I think the push is to, I mean, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is very open about what their goals are. And their goals are, you'll own nothing and be happy. You won't own where you live. You won't own a car. You'll have a digital ID and centrally controlled digital money that they can control what you do with your money. And, ultimately you'll be in line for your ration of cricket meat. And,
sure,
that's what they're going for. It's not.
Why do they want that? It's a control thing, but I
don't understand why.
I feel like all of these, not all, but I feel like some of our leaders and things, they are chosen, whether or not that's all legitimate, vote counts, this or that, but it seems like those people that end up in these places are just the wrong people. Like, they have had addictions to alcohol and major issues with their families, and not to say anyone can't like break through and become a good person, but the way that they're operating is all driven upon this subconscious from like their childhood and the way that they've been going along through life with all these like power induced decisions, say, working your way up through to be president or something. You're constantly trying to do something where you have power. It makes you feel good, and in the light of a disrupted and traumatic society at a young age, that concoction of how things are determined and the way where people come from, it doesn't line up.
Yeah,
like
for
so
the
good,
factors.
The health, there's so many factors. I'm trying to just encompass a certain demeanor about, in general, whether it's Republican or Democratic, but those higher level people in our, government and things like that. I feel like we just need to choose better as voters, and we need to have good options.
I mean, I think two of the biggest factors that would make a difference is, campaign finance, right? If our government, I mean, right now, the biggest problem, I mean, the FDA's budget is 45% pharma, like straight pharma money. And then it's probably a whole bunch more indirectly.
Interesting.
And the biggest recipients of pharma money in the last presidential election were number 1, Biden, number 2, Trump.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If we did have separation of campaigns from, influence business money, that would be huge. And then the other thing is, I mean, right now we've got this binary 2 corrupt parties system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least like right now, I mean, I'm not a fan of either. But it's 100% of Democrats are authoritarian and wanting to take away rights. And most of the Republicans are that way, but at least there's a bunch or some that are, in favor of freedom and care about the Constitution. The way that Democrats are voting right now is 100% anti-Constitution. And so, they're, again, I'm not for either, but I sure hope we can get away from, whatever's going on with, the Democrats, because they're not in favor of freedom in the remotest sense. They're colluding with big tech to censor information that goes against whatever the narrative that they're carrying for pharma or the WEF or some combination. So back to like what things would make a difference. The two things that I think would make the biggest difference, which I don't know how we get there, is campaign finance reform, meaning that, if it was really, if campaigns were shorter and you couldn't take money from corporations directly, indirectly, all the things that they do to get around that, but like actually stop it, that would make a huge difference. And then ranked choice voting, I'm a fan of, because,
ranked choice voting. Okay.
So what ranked choice voting is for each like office that you vote for, you pick your first choice and your second choice and your third choice, etc. And when they run the vote, they take all of the first choices, and if that's over 50, if one person that's among the first choices has over 50%, then they win. But if they don't, then they drop everyone's like third choice or something like that, and then they resort, right? And then they do that until someone gets 50%, and then they win. But what that does is it eliminates the argument that people have for voting a third party. Because right now, I won't vote in most cases for Democrats or Republicans. I tend to vote, in the last couple presidentials, I voted Libertarian because that was the only other party that was in all 50 states. And I feel like I actually made use of my vote as opposed to everyone who voted for, one of the corrupt parties, because if a third party gets over 5% of the vote nationwide, then they're automatically on all 50 state ballots for the next election, and they get national funding, and they're in all the debates. And that would be massive. If we could get a third party into the debates, that would change a lot, right?
Or actually have debates this time.
But most people don't vote third party because they feel like they're throwing away their vote, because if they don't vote for the one that they lean towards, then they feel like they're throwing away their vote. But with ranked choice voting, it eliminates that argument. It makes it so you can vote for a third party that's your favorite, and then if you lean Republican, you make that your number two, or if you lean Democrat, you make that your number two. So you're not throwing away your vote. It's actually giving other parties a chance. So Alaska has switched to this, and Maine has switched to this, and Fort Collins has switched to it. And so there's municipalities across the country that are doing it. There's movements to make it happen, throughout the rest of the country. So ranked choice voting and campaign finance reform would make massive difference. And the campaign, and then also the next thing I think would be term limits, right? Yeah. So term limits for people in Congress and the Senate.
Right.
And so but they're not going to, the people who are in power aren't going to, move to reduce their power traditionally. And then because the system is so corrupt, the people who are attracted to it tend to be corrupt people. And then there's also the whole argument about, how many of these people are completely being blackmailed. Yeah. I mean, we know that, we don't know how bad, but we know there's a huge amount of corruption with the Bidens. And, how owned is he by China? I don't really know. Or owned by the WEF or whatever.
To eventually figure out the whole deep state story about what's going
Epstein,
on with the Bidens.
Where's the Epstein black book? Right?
Yeah, and all that stuff. I mean, the reason I brought up that stuff about the childhood of these people in power is because it says it right here in this book called The Myth of Normal, which
I haven't heard of that.
Dr. Gabor Mate, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast recently, and he wrote this book, and it's co-authored with his son, Daniel.
Okay.
And it literally speaks exactly about Biden's childhood and because of these accounts from a certain unnamed person, and along with the same thing with Trump, like he is wired in this way because of his childhood to the point where anything he says or he wants to believe is true, he believes it no matter if it's true or not. Like, because it's this ultimate,
you're not going to get COVID.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, some of those cartoonish type statements and stuff are because of his fucked up childhood. And obviously those people, like you had said, the corruptness attracts corruptness, and then it's just this just stair step of more corruptness and more fucked up childhood, people that don't know how to deal with their issues, and it's wired these people in this way. So I think you'd be really interested in this book.
Yeah, I want to read that.
And this one's yours.
Oh, wow.
So thanks for coming on the podcast. That's a gift for me.
Thanks, Clay.
That's awesome. I've got another copy, and I'm almost done with it.
Yeah?
And it's amazing.
Awesome.
I've been addicted to reading it.
Cool.
So please
Thank
enjoy
you very
it.
much, Clay.
Pass it along to another friend
Sure.
after you're done. Or, I mean, I plan on doing like some videos. I have so much stuff underlined, bracketed, outlined in like the corner, like I'd scribble the corner. So that one's brand new. So, but
Cool. I'm excited to read it.
I want to do mini, like Clay's perspective on, let's just flip through what I highlighted.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And talk about it. And we could even, I don't know where my book is, but in another podcast, after you start reading it, we could do another podcast and talk about what you highlighted, what I highlighted,
Cool.
Those things, because it just brings up so much with the politics, and you learn. It's almost like a doom and gloom, but also inspirational type book. But at the end, I think it starts on like page 400 something. 420.
420.
Where is it? But yeah, there's things you can do in your journal. Ask yourself these questions every day. Like, what's the number one question was, in my life's important areas, what am I not saying no to? Sorry, you probably didn't hear any of that. In my life's important areas, what am I not saying no to? So like the power to be able to say no is powerful.
Yeah.
And if you just say yes to everything, like you're sort of succumbing to someone else's needs. You're not in your own power. And that's just one thing. Like, okay, I write in my journal, what do I not say no to? And I come up with whatever it was, and I feel like a weakness of some sort with that, and you can push people away by saying yes to everything. It's like the boy cried wolf or something like that. But these are just, and the next one is how does my inability to say no impact my life?
Wow.
And so like around that 400, like the first 400 pages are stories of success for people curing cancer within themselves by just becoming whole as a person spiritually and internally, and their scans are clean. The Western medicine doesn't believe it. They say they still need to have the surgery, and it's just story after story after story of these accounts. And it talks about, Trump and Biden and all that stuff. So
awesome,
yeah,
dude.
For sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Most certainly. I think you're the perfect person to read that, because I feel like you're super smart and well-rounded, and it's just, I've learned a lot in this, just talking with you about the climbing stuff and the politics stuff, which we can have more conversations about, because I'm interested in learning and all those things.
I mean, I don't really know politics, and I'm kind of, I'm repelled by it. Like the stuff that I'm involved in directly is all nonpartisan. I don't, I mean, except for what I told you about with the county, that is a partisan thing, but I'm going in as an independent anyway.
Sure.
If I get onto it, but, yeah, I'm very repelled by the corrupt duopoly. And
yeah,
I mean, I did go for a city council seat, but that's specifically nonpartisan where I live. You're not even allowed to claim a party, even though people still play parties with it.
Sure.
But
right.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So yeah, we'll probably wrap it up here.
Cool. It's been a fun conversation.
For sure. So you can follow Carson at Freeative.
Yeah, on
Instagram for like climbing stories and all the fun mandate things.
I mean, yeah, my Instagram feed is pretty much, I mean, the stories, because I like
And you're on Twitter too, right?
Well, Twitter, I'm Carson Green, and I'm pretty extreme on there. It's mainly lots of retweets of truth that
I know some of my
not
friends,
the narrative.
I know some of my friends would be very interested in following you, and some of my friends would not like you at all. But I don't judge, right? So you can follow me too, The Clay Formula, on Instagram, or The Clay Formula on Spotify, which is where this will go. Tomorrow I'll probably get it uploaded.
Cool, man.
And yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, dude. Fun experience.
Excellent.
I haven't been interviewed for a podcast before.
Hey, we get to connect, and
No, that's cool. I'm glad you invited me.
Yeah, for sure. Let the story continue. Until next time, all 35 listeners at this point. We'll see you soon.